Have you ever been mistaken for someone who didn't belong, just because of the way you looked? What if the person who judged you didn't realize you owned the room they were trying to keep you out of? This story starts with quiet humiliation, but what follows turns power, prejudice, and pride upside down. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The morning air smelled like cinnamon and pine, the kind of scent that clung to early fall mornings in Charlotte. Zariah Ellison stood by her kitchen window, sipping black coffee from her chipped blue mug. The sun stretched soft lines across the wooden countertop as she scrolled through the headlines on her tablet. Nothing felt urgent. Nothing but the thought that today, of all days, she wanted to do something personal. Quietly personal. Her husband's birthday was coming up. Not just any birthday, but the big 5-0. She'd gone back and forth about gifts, watches, books, even a weekend getaway. But none of it felt right. Thurston had once told her, back when they were both broke and eating instant noodles for dinner, "Someday, I'll drive an Azure V Phantom. Not lease it. Own it." Today, she was going to get him that car. Zariah didn't tell him. Didn't ask for his assistant's help either. She wanted it to be hers, her gesture, her voice. Just like it had always been between them, before the money came, before the staff, before the carefully organized life that didn't always leave space for surprise. She pulled on her favorite gray linen shirt, the one that felt like a soft secret against her skin, paired it with dark jeans and simple loafers. No makeup. No jewelry. Her curls tucked back with a brown headband. The mirror didn't reflect wealth, and that was the point. Orion Lux, East Point Branch, stood like a modern glass temple off the interstate. Every car inside looked like it belonged in a billionaire's dream journal. She parked quietly at the edge of a lot, ignoring the valet who blinked, unsure whether to approach. She wasn't interested in ceremony. Just the car. Just the intention. The moment she stepped inside, the coldness hit her faster than the air conditioning. A man with slick back hair and a stiff suit, Chadwell Greer, spotted her before she reached the main floor. He didn't smile, just walked toward her like a boundary being drawn. "Ma'am," he said, arms crossed, "we don't do tours here. Unless you've got an appointment or a reason to be here, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Zariah blinked, caught off guard by the sharpness. "I'm here to ask about the Azure V Phantom model." He tilted his head and smirked. "That's a $400,000 car. You sure you're in the right place?" The words didn't sting like a slap. They sank deeper, like cold water finding old wounds. She heard the quiet shift of a sales rep nearby, saw the hesitation in a receptionist's eyes. No one moved. No one said a thing. She could have told him who she was. Could have said, "My husband's name is Thurston Ellison, and if you opened a business journal once in your life, you'd know who signs the checks." But that wasn't her. That was never her way. Instead, she let the silence thicken, held his gaze, calm, unwavering. Then she nodded once and turned back toward the door. Not defeated, just done. As she passed the receptionist, the young woman mumbled under her breath, "You shouldn't have done that, sir." Zariah didn't look back. She got into her car, hands steady on the wheel, but her jaw clenched tight. The engine hummed to life, low and quiet. Her heart beat like a drum buried under years of being told she wasn't enough, didn't belong, wasn't the right shape or shade or income bracket. She'd fought those voices before. She thought she'd won. But there was always someone waiting to remind her. Back inside the showroom, Chadwell leaned against the counter, flipping through a sleek brochure. He pulled out his phone, smirked as he dialed, and chuckled into the receiver. "I swear," he said, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, "some people just think walking into a showroom makes them rich." His voice trailed off into the polished air. The receptionist glanced at him, then back the door where Zariah had just walked out. Her expression tightened. Not quite anger, not quite guilt. Just the uncomfortable weight of witnessing something quietly cruel. Outside, Zariah turned onto the main road, the city stretching before her in late morning light. She didn't cry. She didn't even frown. But her eyes, reflected briefly in the rearview mirror, held something that had nothing to do with money or cars or birthdays. They held memory. and fire. The bell above the door let out a soft chime as Zariah stepped into Cafe Avellini. The place hadn't changed. Same scratched wooden counters. Same warm smell of roasted beans and cinnamon rolls. The girl at the counter offered a quick smile, one of those polite ones people give to someone who clearly wants to be left alone. Zariah nodded in return, ordered her usual black, no sugar, and took a seat by the window. She sat still for a long while, both hands wrapped around the paper cup. Outside, cars rolled past, leaves skittered across the sidewalk, and people hurried about their day like the world hadn't just reminded her she didn't belong. There was a time when this cafe had been her escape. She and Thurston used to meet here after long days teaching, him barely scraping by as a substitute, her juggling 2 part-time jobs and a classroom full of middle schoolers. They'd share stale cookies and laugh about how broke they were. Back then, no one judged what they wore or how they walked through the door. Now she sat in silence, watching people come and go, wondering how many of them would have been treated differently in that showroom. How many would have been welcomed simply because they looked like they belonged. Her mind drifted further back to when she was 12, trying on sneakers in a store near her old neighborhood. The clerk never left her side, kept glancing at her hands, at her backpack, whispering to another employee like she couldn't hear. She remembered the heat in her cheeks, the shame crawling up her neck. That day, she'd gone home and cried, told herself when she grew up, she'd never let anyone make her feel small again. But here she was, grown, married, comfortable, and still being sized up like a suspect. That evening, the house was warm with the smell of rosemary and roasted chicken. Zariah cooked when her hands needed something to do. And today, her hands needed a lot of distraction. Thurston came home later than usual, looking tired but content. He set his briefcase by the hallway bench, loosened his tie, and walked straight to the kitchen. "Smells like you've outdone yourself," he said, kissing her cheek. She smiled. "Just trying to feed you before your metabolism gives up on you." They sat at the small round table near the window, plates clinking gently between bites. He talked about a conference call, a contract negotiation, a dinner he might have to attend. She nodded, asked questions, laughed in the right places. But her heart wasn't there. Not really. Thurston noticed. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said quickly, too quickly. Then softened. "Just tired. Long day." He watched her for a second longer, then let it go. He trusted her to share things in her own time. That had always been their quiet agreement. Later that night, Zariah curled up on the sofa with a book she didn't read. The pages blurred. Her mind was too loud. She wasn't angry, not in the way people expected. What she felt was colder, heavier, like something that settled into the ribs and made breathing harder. Upstairs, Thurston sat in his home office. The room was minimalist, quiet, his thinking space. He opened his laptop to review some pending reports from his latest acquisition, Orion Lux Motors. The name still sounded a bit too flashy for his taste, but it had potential. The luxury car market was struggling with image and consistency. He'd bought the chain not just to turn a profit, but to reinvent how luxury could look and who it could serve. He clicked through the internal memos, pausing at a flag file. Customer service issues. Most were minor complaints, slow responses, miscommunication. But one location had multiple notes about discrimination concerns. East Point branch. He opened the report. Several anonymous comments from both customers and staff. Words like cold, selective, not welcoming to everyone. He frowned. That was not the culture he wanted. Not in a company bearing his signature. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd pay East Point a visit. Quietly. No press. No heads up. Just a walkthrough. He wanted to see for himself. He glanced at his calendar. Zariah's birthday surprise still starred in gold. Reveal Orion Lux gift. The Azure V Phantom was part of the plan. So was a private delivery. Maybe even a bow on top. He shut the laptop, unaware that his wife had already met the face of East Point. That her silence at dinner wasn't about being tired. Downstairs, Zariah finally let her book drop to her lap. The room was dark now, except for the soft amber light from the floor lamp beside her. She closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. The next morning, Zariah lingered in front of her closet longer than she meant to. The steam from her shower still clung to the mirror, fogging her reflection, making everything soft around the edges. Her hand hovered over a floral dress, then a bright red blouse, then pulled back. She didn't want to be loud. She didn't want to be invisible either. She chose a crisp navy blouse with pearl buttons, a pair of black slacks that fell just right over her low-heeled leather shoes, and a simple pair of earrings. Nothing sparkled. Her curls were pulled back into a smooth bun at the nape of her neck. She added a touch of balm to her lips, not for show, but for steadiness. It wasn't about looking rich. It was about not letting herself be erased. The drive to the East Point branch felt shorter than the day before. Maybe it was the clarity. Maybe it was the quiet storm inside her that had settled into something colder, more focused. The building stood there as shiny as ever, glass and chrome pretending to be neutral, as if a space could be innocent of what had happened inside it. She walked in through the same door. The same light classical music floated in the air, sterile and unobtrusive. The smell of leather and polish wrapped around her like a staged welcome. But this time she didn't pause. Chadwell Greer stood near the front desk, glancing at a clipboard like he was expecting someone more important. He looked up, saw her, and a flicker passed through his face. Surprise? Annoyance? He smiled, or tried to. "Well," he said, making his way over, back again. His tone carried that same artificial warmth. Just enough charm to pass, just enough sarcasm to sting. "If this is about yesterday, ma'am," he added, "I was just doing my job. We have an image to maintain." Zariah looked him square in the eye, her expression calm, unreadable. "And that image doesn't include people who look like me?" He chuckled, low and dismissive. "Let's just say we have standards. Some folks just don't fit." It landed, every word. But Zariah didn't blink. Her hands didn't shake. That surprised her. Her voice didn't hitch. That surprised her more. She simply let her gaze wander across the polished floors, the wide windows, the immaculate line of cars. And the employees who glanced up, then away. None of them moved. She turned to leave. She'd said enough. Or maybe she hadn't. But silence, when intentional, could speak louder than a raised voice. Just then, a man walked in. Mid-30s. White. Wearing sweat-stained khakis and a wrinkled t-shirt, with a cartoon raccoon holding a beer bottle. He looked like he'd just rolled out of a couch, not a conference room. Zariah stepped aside to make room. Chadwell's entire body shifted. Back straighter. Smile wider. "Sir, welcome. Anything I can help you with today?" The man shrugged. "Just looking." "No problem," Chadwell said smoothly. "Take your time. Let me know if anything catches your eye." Zariah didn't need a mic drop. The contrast was the statement. She reached for the door, but a voice stopped her just before she touched it. "I'm sorry." She turned. A young black woman, barely out of college, maybe, stood near the side counter. Her blazer hung slightly too big on her frame, like she'd borrowed it from someone who thought professionalism came in one size. Her eyes were wide, cautious. "You weren't the first," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "He's done this before. But no one says anything because, well, look who signs our paychecks." Zariah looked at her, really looked at her. The tension in her shoulders. The way her badge hung crooked from her collar. The way she stood halfway behind a pillar, like truth had to be hidden to be safe. "I see," Zariah said softly. She didn't promise to fix it. She didn't offer encouragement. What she offered was presence, and a silent vow to carry this moment with her. She walked out into the sun, not rushing. Her car sat in the same space it had the day before, but this time it felt like it was waiting for someone different. She sat behind the wheel, hands folded in her lap, engine off. From the outside, she looked serene. On the inside, everything was fire and granite. She didn't pick up the phone. She didn't blast the story on social media. She went home. Later that night, in her study, with a lavender candle flickering on the corner of the desk, Zariah opened her laptop. The quiet in the room was deep and deliberate. She created a new draft email. No recipient. Just a title. What they see when they see me. Her fingers began to move. She wrote about Chadwell, about his tone, about how it felt to be dismissed in a place her husband had helped build. She described the way the white man in the cartoon shirt was welcomed. The way Amira had spoken like truth might cost her rent. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. Her typing was steady, like building a wall of words, brick by brick, line by line, not to keep people out, but to keep herself from crumbling in. She didn't send the email. Not yet. She closed the laptop gently, letting her hand rest on the lid, like sealing something sacred. Upstairs, the bedroom light was off. The house was asleep. But Zariah was awake. Some battles aren't loud. Some don't begin with fire. They begin in silence. With a woman who refuses to vanish. The next day started gray and brisk, the kind of weather that made people walk faster and talk quieter. Thurston Ellison pulled into the lot of Orion Lux, East Point Branch, just after 10. No security escort, no flashy car. Just a charcoal pullover, clean slacks, and that presence he carried without trying. Quiet authority wrapped in good manners. Inside, Chadwell Greer was mid-sentence, with a couple considering a hybrid coupe, when he saw the man step through the glass doors. He squinted slightly, trying to place the face. Thurston didn't look like a car buyer. He looked like someone important, but not the kind Chadwell was used to. The kind who didn't need to announce it. "Good morning," Thurston said as he entered, eyes moving calmly over the space. "I'm here for a walkthrough. Corporate review." Chadwell straightened, smoothing down his blazer. "Of course. I didn't receive any notice, but happy to show you around." "You weren't supposed to," Thurston said, almost smiling. "That's the point." The staff, suddenly aware of a shift in energy, quieted. Chadwell tried to keep control, leading the way with polished charm, but his posture had stiffened. Still, he didn't know yet. Out on the road, Zariah was driving back from a morning visit to one of her scholarship students. Her route wasn't planned. She just needed air and open space. But as she turned onto Eastbrook Avenue, she saw a familiar car parked outside the showroom. Her stomach dropped. She pulled into the lot, slower than usual, parking 3 rows back. She hadn't intended to come here again. Certainly not today. But there it was, his car. Her husband's car. And standing inside, through the glass, was Thurston himself, hands in his pockets, quietly observing the very place that had made her feel so invisible. She stepped inside. The air conditioning was sharp against her skin, or maybe it was just a memory. The receptionist, a young woman with tightly coiled hair and kind eyes, looked up, and her expression shifted in surprise. "Mrs. Ellison?" Zariah paused. The name hung in the air like a slow echo. Chadwell turned sharply at the sound of it. He stared at her, blinking, recognizing. Zariah didn't flinch. She walked forward, each step measured, her heels echoing lightly against the marble tile. Thurston turned too, his face lighting up in confusion and warmth. "Hey, I didn't know you were coming by." Zariah stopped beside him and lowered her voice. "You didn't tell me." He looked puzzled. "Was about to. It was supposed to be a surprise." Her eyes didn't leave his. It was. Chadwell's face had gone pale. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He watched them, realization creeping across his expression like slow-moving thunder. Zariah didn't look at him. She was still trying to breathe evenly, trying to make sense of what this moment was asking of her. Because now she knew. This wasn't just a showroom where something ugly had happened. It was her husband's showroom. The company he now owned. The brand he was rebuilding, reshaping. Unknowingly built on a moment that had tried to reduce her. And she hadn't told him. She could feel his warmth beside her, his energy already tuned in. But he didn't know. Not yet. Zariah's gaze swept the room. The staff stood still, pretending not to watch, but they were. Especially Amira, the young woman from the day before, who stood just behind the desk, eyes wide and pleading without saying a word. She could speak now. Say everything. Name what had happened and let it crash down on Chadwell like justice long overdue. It would be so easy. One sentence, and this man would be finished. But then what? Would it change anything if it came from the wife of the boss? Or would it become a power play? A personal grudge dressed up as corporate responsibility? Her voice was quiet when she spoke. Let's talk later. In private. Thurston gave her a look, half concern, half curiosity. But he nodded. Okay. He turned back to Chadwell, who still hadn't moved. I'll finish the review, Thurston said, his tone shifting just slightly, cooler, more precise. We'll be making some changes soon. Zariah walked out without looking back. The wind had picked up, brushing against her cheeks as she stepped into daylight. She felt raw and steady at once, like someone holding a truth too heavy to say out loud. At least not yet. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do. But she knew this. Silence, too, could be power, if held in the right hands. The house was too still that night. The kind of stillness that didn't comfort. It pressed in, like it was holding its breath. Zariah sat across from Thurston in his office, one hand cupped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. The steam had stopped rising, but she held on to it anyway, like maybe the warmth would return if she gripped it hard enough. The walls, painted in a calming shade of gray, usually gave the room a sense of peace. But tonight it felt sterile, like a waiting room before bad news. Thurston sat in his chair, back slightly reclined, one leg crossed over the other. His sleeves were still rolled up from work, and he hadn't loosened his watch band like he usually did. He didn't fidget, but he didn't relax either. He watched her, not impatiently, more like a man who was trying to read weather patterns in the sky. Something was shifting. He just didn't know if it would rain or storm. You've been quiet, he said, his voice low and even. Zariah looked down into her mug, then up at him. Eyes heavy. Just processing, I guess. Processing what? She hesitated. Her lips parted, but nothing came out at first. She stared at a spot on the rug, her mind drifting back to the image of Chadwell's face, the sound of Amira's voice, thin, afraid, true. That moment hadn't left her. It had just settled into her chest, like a stone wrapped in cotton. I felt small in that place, she finally said. Like I didn't belong. Like I was intruding on something that didn't want me. Thurston's brow furrowed slightly. Which place? She shook her head. It doesn't matter. It just hit harder than I expected. There was a pause. He looked at her a beat longer, searching, maybe waiting for more. But when it didn't come, he nodded once. Okay, he said gently. And just like that, he didn't press. Because he'd always known the difference between loving someone and demanding their truth on your timeline. They sat together in the quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of the ceiling fan overhead. The air between them wasn't cold, but it was cautious. Like both of them knew there was more under the surface, and neither was quite ready to touch it. Eventually, Zariah stood. She walked around to his side of the desk, leaned in, and pressed a soft kiss to his temple. Then she whispered, "Good night," and left the room. He watched her go. The door closed behind her with a hush that felt final. She padded upstairs, changed into her favorite cotton pajamas, brushed her teeth automatically. She didn't cry. She didn't feel angry. Just tired. So tired. She slipped into bed alone, the sheets cool and neatly folded, and stared at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the faint sounds from downstairs. Thurston remained in the office. The mug she had left behind still sat untouched on the table. He reached for it, but didn't drink. Instead, his eyes drifted toward her laptop, resting neatly on the bookshelf beside a stack of her teaching journals. He didn't mean to pry. He truly didn't. He needed a document, an updated budget spreadsheet for one of the Foundation's scholarship programs. She had mentioned it was on her desktop. He tapped the spacebar, and the screen came to life. He clicked through her folders slowly, careful not to disturb anything. Then he saw it. A single file. A draft email. Unsent. Titled, "When You're Told You Don't Belong." His hand hovered over the mouse. Something told him not to open it, but something else, stronger, deeper, told him he had to. He clicked. The first line hit like a slap. "I've been black all my life. But there are still days when it takes me by surprise how much that bothers other people." His eyes didn't leave the screen. She wrote about Chadwell. about the tone in his voice, the dismissiveness in his body language, about the man in the raccoon t-shirt and how he was welcomed without hesitation, about the silence in the room, the kind that screamed. She wrote about being followed at 13 in a store where she was just trying to try on a dress, about how those memories didn't die. They just sat quietly, waiting for someone like Chadwell to wake them up again. She wrote like she was bleeding with grace. Each line controlled, careful, and devastating. When he finished the email, he didn't move right away. He just sat there, hands on the desk, jaw locked tight, eyes burning, not just from the words, but from what they meant. His wife. The woman he adored. The woman who gave and never asked for much. She had walked into his company, into his vision, and left feeling less than human. And she hadn't told him. Not because she didn't trust him. Because she knew exactly what he might do if he found out. That was what hurt most. That night, he didn't go to bed. He sat there for a long time, the room dark except for the light from the laptop screen. When morning came, soft and pale through the windows, Zariah padded downstairs in her robe. She was tying the sash when she froze in place. Her laptop was open. The draft was marked red. Her stomach dropped. She stared at it, heart racing, then slowed. He knew, and he hadn't said a word. She stood there for a long moment, the light from the window casting a soft glow on her skin. The conference room at the East Point branch wasn't particularly small. But that morning, it felt like the walls were inching closer with every breath. The blinds had been drawn halfway, and the recessed lights above cast a sterile white glow on the polished table. Chairs lined both sides, every seat filled. Employees sat up straighter than usual, hands folded, eyes flicking between each other, trying not to let their nerves show. Thurston Ellison stood at the head of the table. He didn't wear a suit, no tie, just a slate gray sweater rolled at the sleeves and dark slacks, like a man who had nothing to prove. And yet, the entire room responded to him like gravity itself had entered. He had arrived without an entourage, without warning, just hours after sunrise. No name tag, no introductory handshake, only a quiet request. Gather everyone. I want to hear how things run here from the inside. That request had made its way down the hall like thunder in slow motion. Chadwell Greer, of course, had taken control. He stood near the front with a wireless presenter in hand and a confidence that hadn't cracked yet. He clicked through slides filled with graphs and buzzwords, target demographics, client experience funnels, and visual alignment strategies. Let's be honest, Chadwell said, pacing. We all know that not everyone who walks through our doors is our market. And it's our job to spot that early. If someone's clearly browsing, clearly not a buyer, we're wasting time and damaging the atmosphere we've built. A few heads nodded, mostly older staff who had heard the same rhetoric for years. Amira sat near the back, fingers lightly trembling against her notepad. She was writing, but only half-heartedly, doodling in the margins more than anything. At one point, she looked up, opened her mouth to speak, then thought better of it and lowered her eyes again. Thurston hadn't spoken. Not yet. He let the performance continue, studying the way people responded. How some nodded without thinking. How others stayed quiet not from agreement, but from fear. When the presentation wrapped up, Thurston cleared his throat, not loud, but enough. The sound sliced through the tension like a razor through silk. Mr. Greer, he began, his voice even and almost soft. You mentioned the importance of spotting who's suitable for our brand. Chadwell smiled, an easy, practiced expression. Exactly. Not just financially, but visually. Presentation sends a message. If someone doesn't match the tone of the showroom, it's best to redirect them early. Thurston tilted his head, as if genuinely curious. Define not suitable. Chadwell laughed, a quick, dismissive sound. You know, folks who don't present themselves in line with what our clientele expects. It's not personal. It's about maintaining the environment. Thurston nodded slowly. Right. He tapped once on his iPad. The image that appeared on the screen was still. Clear. Zariah stood just inside the showroom, calm and composed, her hands at her sides. Chadwell stood in front of her, arm lifted slightly, mid-sentence, eyes narrowed. His posture, His face, everything about it screamed condescension. The room stilled. Even the air conditioner seemed to hush. "That woman you dismissed," Thurston said, voice low. "That's Zariah Ellison. My wife." The silence cracked wide open. Chadwell froze. A beat passed before the blood drained from his face, as if his own body was retreating from the moment. His jaw twitched. I didn't know," he stammered. "She didn't look like—" Thurston didn't flinch. "Like what?" Chadwell tried again. Like a buyer. I thought maybe she was lost. Or maybe you thought she didn't belong because she didn't look like the picture in your head," Thurston said, his voice sharper now. "You made her feel small. You made her feel invisible. In a building I now own." "I was protecting the brand," Chadwell offered weakly. "I thought—" "No," Thurston said firmly. "You were protecting your prejudice. You called it atmosphere, but what you meant was, people who make me uncomfortable." Chadwell opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. Thurston turned to the team, eyes sweeping the room. "Let me be clear. Orion Lux will no longer cater to bias. Our excellence isn't just in polished chrome and clean suits. It's in how we treat every single person who walks through that door." He looked back at Chadwell one last time. "You're done here." The words didn't echo, but they didn't have to. They landed like concrete. Chadwell stood frozen for a moment, then picked up his notes with stiff fingers. No one offered to help. No one spoke. As he exited the room, the silence wasn't out of sympathy. It was the kind people give to things already buried. Thurston turned back to the room. "If anyone here has a problem with what I just said," he added, "you're free to find another place to work. But if you're ready to build something better, something real, then stay. This place changes now." No one moved. Amira quietly wiped one eye. Not from sadness, but from the weight finally lifting. It wasn't just that someone had listened. It was that someone with power had finally acted. When Zariah stepped through the glass doors of the East Point showroom that morning, it felt like the air itself had changed. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows in sharp, clean angles. But what struck her wasn't the light. It was the silence. Not the kind of silence that came from fear or tension. It was something softer, hesitant, respectful. The kind of silence that followed a storm. Employees paused mid-task. One man subtly straightened his tie. A receptionist at the front desk offered a quiet, almost reverent nod. Even the ones who had barely acknowledged her days before now looked at her not with doubt, but with awareness. Something had shifted, and they all knew why. Amira was waiting near the entrance, standing straighter than usual. Her blazer fit a little better today, or maybe she just carried herself differently. "Thank you," she said, voice low but firm, "for doing what nobody else would." Zariah placed a warm hand on her arm. "It takes more than one voice to make a change," she said gently. "But one voice can start it." They shared a moment of stillness, neither smiling, neither crying. Just two women, standing inside a place that once made them feel small, now beginning to feel like theirs. Across the room, movement caught Zariah's eye. Chadwell. He was near his desk, stuffing files into a leather briefcase. Papers were crumpled at the edges, like he'd grabbed them too fast. His jaw was clenched tight, and his face carried the blotchy red flush of someone who'd been pretending not to care all morning. His tie hung loose around his neck. His back was hunched, not from humility, but from the weight of being watched. When he looked up and saw her, his eyes darkened. Not with surprise. He had expected this. But something colder flickered there. Wounded pride, old anger, the kind of resentment that grows when someone else holds a mirror to your flaws. He slammed the briefcase shut, loud enough for heads to turn, then strode toward her. "You happy now?" he said through gritted teeth. "You got me fired because your husband owns the place." Zariah didn't blink. She didn't flinch. Her voice was steady. "No," she said quietly. "You got yourself fired because you don't know how to treat people." Chadwell let out a bitter scoff. "I treat people the way they show up." Zariah took a slow breath. "No. You treat people the way you expect them to be. And that's the problem." He started to speak again, but she raised a hand, not to silence him, but to take the space she needed. She looked him dead in the eye. When I was 13, she said, her voice almost tender but clear, my mom took me downtown to buy a dress for church. We didn't have much money, but she wanted me to feel special. I picked one off a mannequin, asked to try it on. Chadwell shifted his weight, but she kept going. The woman behind the counter looked me up and down and said, try the clearance rack. That room's for paying customers only. I was too stunned to speak. My mom told me to let it go. So I did. She paused. The memory settled between them like dust. But I promised myself right then that if I ever got the chance to speak up for myself or someone else, I wouldn't stay quiet again. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I'm not keeping quiet anymore. Chadwell's mouth opened, but whatever came to mind wasn't worth saying. His shoulders sank, just slightly. He looked away. Then he muttered something too low to be heard and turned toward the exit. No one followed. No one said goodbye. He left with nothing but a briefcase and the echo of a place that would no longer make room for men like him. Zariah stood there for a long moment, letting the silence settle again. This time, it felt like something had been released. She turned and walked toward the small office just past the main floor. Inside, a few employees had gathered around a long table. The regional director was already seated. Amira took a spot at the far end, her notepad in front of her, pen ready. On the table lay a stack of policy documents. At the top of the pile sat a clipboard, clean and expectant, with a single form clipped under it. Zariah picked up the pen. She signed her name first, next to the line that read, Advisory Council for Inclusive Client Relations, Internal Founding Member. Then she passed the pen to Amira. The young woman took it with both hands, as if it carried weight. This isn't just paperwork, Zariah said, her voice softer now. It's how we make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to someone else. Amira nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. We'll get it right. Zariah smiled just a little. Getting it right means staying loud, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then. They all sat down, young and old, black and white, nervous and ready, and turned the first page together. This wasn't a revenge story. It was something harder, something braver. Rebuilding. 1 week later, there were no news cameras outside the East Point showroom. No think pieces. No hashtags. Just a quiet update posted on the Orion Lux website, tucked neatly beneath the latest vehicle promotion banner. New initiative. Respect first. A commitment to every customer. No marketing fluff. No apology tour. Just a single measured statement. We believe excellence begins with dignity. Our doors are open to all who walk through them. But those words, simple as they were, moved like roots through the company. Training manuals were revised. Role-play scripts rewritten. Terms like professional appearance were clarified, redefined, unpacked. HR teams across the country scheduled sessions on implicit bias, cultural humility, and inclusive communication. Some employees grumbled. Others leaned in. But the shift had begun, and this time it wasn't a memo to be skimmed and shelved. It had a pulse. And standing at the heart of that change was Amira. She was no longer hiding behind her desk or speaking in whispers. At the Charlotte showroom, where the first formal orientation took place, she stood near the front, her badge now pinned straight, her voice steady. Zariah introduced her with only one sentence. Amira Johnson is someone who speaks from the heart and listens twice as hard. The room applauded. Not politely, genuinely. Amira's voice wavered during her first few lines, but her hands didn't shake. She walked them through the new approach, not with corporate jargon, but with clarity and care. She didn't need a title to carry authority. She had lived the silence. Now, she carried the microphone. Later that night, Zariah sat alone at the kitchen table, chamomile tea steaming beside her. The porch door cracked open just enough to let the autumn air curl in. The wind smelled like leaves and something new, like what smoke and promise. She opened her laptop, intending to review some files for the foundation. Instead, her inbox blinked with one unread message. No subject. No sender. Just one line. Thank you. We saw what you did. And it meant something. Zariah froze. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad, then slowly scrolled to the bottom. Nothing else. No signature. No call to action. Just those words. She read it again. Then again. Her throat tightened. It could have been from anyone. A former employee. A stranger. A cashier who'd been dismissed before they could speak. Or someone who was still keeping quiet but had seen enough to hope. She didn't need to know who. That wasn't the point. What mattered was that someone had been watching, and they saw her. She closed the laptop slowly and let her palms rest over the lid. For a moment, she just sat there, letting the weight of that quiet thank you settle deep in her chest. Not heavy, just full. Outside on the porch, Thurston sat in the old wooden swing, a blanket tossed over one leg and 2 mugs beside him. He looked up when she stepped out, smiling like he'd been waiting all evening. She sank beside him, tucking her legs beneath her robe, and took the tea he handed her. They didn't speak at first. The sky was blushing itself into dusk, streaked with soft gold and muted lavender. The wind rustled through the oaks in their front yard, sending leaves spinning like dancers in slow motion. Finally, Thurston asked, "Do you ever regret not telling me earlier?" Zariah watched the horizon for a long beat before answering. "No," she said. "I needed to carry it on my own first. To feel the weight of it. Not to be rescued, but to choose how to stand." He didn't press. Just nodded once, his hand resting lightly over hers. Not the kind of nod that said "I agree, but I understand." In another corner of the country, Chadwell's name floated quietly in HR emails and half-spoken conversations. A small dealership in Arkansas brought him on board, hoping to benefit from his experience. But it didn't last. Complaints emerged about tone, about discretion, about the way he read people. They didn't fire him. They just stopped calling him back. He wasn't ruined, but he wasn't respected either. And sometimes the absence of trust is the most permanent kind of consequence. Zariah never mentioned his name again, not because she held onto anger, but because it no longer served a purpose. That chapter was closed. What mattered was the chapter that followed. A week later, on a sunlit Saturday morning, she returned to the Charlotte showroom. This time, she wasn't alone. She brought a bus full of students from her foundation, kids from neighborhoods like the one she'd grown up in. Bright eyes, quick minds, laughter that carried. They wore matching polos and sneakers that had clearly been polished the night before. Some walked wide-eyed between the sleek displays. Others rushed straight to the sports cars, arguing over which one they drive when they made it. Zariah walked alongside them, pointing out features, answering questions, letting their curiosity run wild. A small girl, 7 or 8, skin the color of cinnamon and glasses thick and purple, walked beside her the entire time. "Ms. Ellison," she asked, tugging gently on her sleeve, "have you always been rich?" Zariah chuckled, bending slightly to hear her better. "No," she said, "but I've always known my worth." The girl tilted her head. "Is that kind of the same?" Zariah crouched down to meet her eyes, her smile soft and sure. "It's better." Then she stood, took the little girl's hand, and walked forward, into a place that had once tried to define her by silence. But not anymore. Now, it stood on something stronger. Truth. Sometimes, the most powerful change doesn't come from shouting, but from standing firm in who you are and refusing to shrink for someone else's comfort. Zariah didn't win with revenge. She led with grace and let dignity do the work. So let us ask you, have you ever walked away from something unfair or chosen to face it head on? What gave you the strength? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us. More stories like this, real, raw, and human, are coming your way.